Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In this lecture, we are going to look at popular culture that comes in the printed form. There are many things one can discuss under this topic. For instance, magazines, work of fiction, work of non-fiction, all those self-help books that are very popular. Many things can come under what is considered to be popular in print. And also a historical perspective can also be taken, because unlike technologies such as television or radio or cinema or the digital, this form of media has been around for quite some time now. So, there is already a lot of literature available about media in the print form. In this discussion, we will focus more on the kinds of ethnographic works that have been done to enable us to understand how people engage with popular culture when it is in the form of a printed object. Not all of this research has been done by anthropologists necessarily. There are also people who are from diverse disciplines like visual art, sociology and literature, but largely what I have tried to do is to get work from people who have used ethnographic method as a method to understand what is going on here. So, what we will predominantly concentrate on are works of fiction, which is easy to understand as popular fiction. What will be what people will be amazed with is sometimes who the writers are. And we have this image of popular fiction writers being very young and out in the world kind of people, but sometimes these are also very senior men and women who are writing. For instance, one of the most popular female writers of fiction in Tamil is a woman called Ramani Chandran, who writes under the name of Ramani Chandran, and a very senior woman whose works are extremely popular. We see these popular works available in bookstalls, at the airport, in the railway stations, in malls, in many places where people congregate. Clearly, they are very popular. Then the question for us as scholars and researchers is, what makes them popular? Who is the audience? Who is buying these books and reading them? Of course, not all popular books fall into one genre. There are many books written by foreign authors in English, for example, that are hugely popular in India, far more than they may be popular in their own worlds where these writers come from. So they span a range of genres. There is crime fiction, there is romance, there is horror, there is also science fiction, which is science fiction is extremely popular too. In here for the discussion today, I am taking work done on popular romance fiction, which also has a very interesting gendering there going on about the writers, about the readers and about the content. So, like I said, Ramani Chandran writes in Tamil. There are also a lot of authors who write in other regional languages like Hindi and many other languages in India. The most popular one that English speaking audience readers would know will be the Mills and Boon publications, the books that come under this category called Mills and Boon novels. So these novels have a huge fan following and have had a readership for a long time in India now, many decades. So there are women who have read Mills and Boon novel, and then there are 2 or 3 generations who have also read Mills and Boon novels. What makes them so popular? Who are the people that are found in these novels? Now, if we go a little bit back in history to understand if there is any ancestry at all that will help us place these novels in context, one can go back to works of authors like Jane Austen, whose work Pride and Prejudice is one of the most famous, but she has many works to her credit. And from then onwards, a notion of intimacy, a notion of liking between a man and a woman, a notion of compatibility between a man and a woman. There was a lot of intimacy one could read in Pride and Prejudice, but there was certainly an idea being given that a good partnership, a good relationship should be based upon a mutual understanding and knowing each other and compatibility, and that kind of a relationship should be able to cross barriers that society has. So we know that in Pride and Prejudice, the heroine Elizabeth comes from what we may call a middle class background compared to the male lead who comes from an extremely rich background. Even so, through the novel we can see how their relationship goes through various points of disjuncture, misunderstandings, and then finally they succeed in coming together. One can argue that that these kind of works of literature were the precursors to what we understand the romance novels to be. But also other writers like Elizabeth Gaskell, who wrote a book called North and South, and also a series of works chronicling Victorian period in England, in works like Cranford, for example. The reason why they are still popular even today is that there has been a translation of these works from literature to television and film, particularly in England. One such series of Jane Austen's work, Pride and Prejudice, which is hugely popular with audience even now, is the 1995 production by the BBC called Pride and Prejudice that made the character of Darcy very popular across the world, and the actor playing it, Colin Firth, also very popular. You may also remember that a film which came many years later, Bridget Jones's Diary, has the lead male actor called as Darcy, and incidentally it is also played by Colin Firth, who played the character of Darcy in Pride and Prejudice in 1995. So this is to say that these characters last a long time. They are in people's minds, and this idea that one can overlook class differences or any other kind of difference if there is compatibility and a sense of companionship, and then that is what one should desire for, has been there for some time and still quite popular. And this is the kind of audience that form the readers of Mills and Boon novels. I am not drawing a direct correlation between readers of Jane Austen novels and readers of Mills and Boon novels, because clearly we do not have any evidence, at least from research point of view, that these are the same people who are reading both. They may or they may not. But what I am trying to say here is this gives the for a possibility of a certain kind of readership, which then Mills and Boon novels capitalize on. So, Jyoti Puri, who is a sociologist, has done a study on such readers. She interviewed young people in colleges in Mumbai and conducted a written survey with a questionnaire and also in-depth interviews. What she found was that even if they were very young women, somewhere between 19 to 21 years, so they must have been in undergraduate or early postgraduate degrees, a lot of them did expect to confirm two notions of marriage and motherhood. So, they did assume that eventually they will get married and they will have a family, and a lot of them also assumed that the marriages may be arranged, but desired what we now call more often marriages of choice or companionate marriages. Marriages which are decided with some input from the people who are going to get married, particularly the girl, the woman. In India, most marriages, as we know, there is a lot of statistical evidence also out there, most marriages are arranged by their families, largely within their own socio-economic and cultural groups, and maybe also with regional and geographic similarities as well, and linguistic similarities. So, a lot of people, particularly women, do not expect that they will be able to marry someone totally different, whether they will even be able to meet and then like and then be liked in return and then marry someone completely different from their own immediate socio-cultural setting. However, in the research that Jyoti Puri did, a lot of women did express a desire that they wish that their marriages would be marriages of choice, where they are able to say yes or no to the person. So, this person may be someone that the family will introduce to them, or it might be someone that they meet and then come to know. Either way, a marriage of choice was expressed as a desire, but largely they expected that it would be a marriage arranged by families. So, why are women's ideas about marriage important in understanding popular fiction? Because the subjects of these fictional works are all about romance. They are all about a man and a woman meeting each other, trying to understand or misunderstand mostly, and then figure out that they are well suited for each other, fall in love, and finally succeed in their relationship by marriage or whatever. So, lot of these novels are focused on romance per se, and therefore ideas of what kind of marriages these women wish to have or expect, their aspirations and dreams and desires are very important for us to place their reading habit of popular fiction in that context. So, without understanding this, it will not be really enough for us to just conduct a survey of what are the kinds of books you are reading and come to some conclusion. That alone will not tell us much. We have to see what they are reading along with what kind of notions they have about what they are reading. For example, romance. And unsurprisingly, most of the women also stuck to a very high heteronormative understanding of marriage and relationship. They also expressed a lot of anxiety. They were quite anxious about what kind of marriages they will have, what kind of persons they will marry, how will married life turn out to be. These things caused considerable anxiety, and in many cases these novels were a way to address those anxieties. One of the findings of this study is that there is a lot of pleasure that the women acquire by being able to read all fiction, particularly romance fiction, but more importantly what they talked to Jyoti Puri about was the kind of anxieties that they had about their future life. One of the things that makes them easily relate to the context of these novels, we should remember that a lot of Mills and Boon novels have protagonists who are not necessarily from India. They are located elsewhere, they are ethnically, racially, and in many other contexts very different people. And yet what these women found relatable was that mostly women married up, what is called in anthropology as a hypergamy. That is, women from middle class, not poor necessarily, but mostly middle class backgrounds will always end up marrying this man who will be extremely rich. So, ideas about hypergamy were reinforced, they were not necessarily challenged. Another point to remember here, popular culture should not always be seen only as resistance. It can also be a text that allows for reinforcement of cultural notions of hierarchy. So, that was something they could understand. Another point was a lot of women felt that they need not have to make decisions about whether they should work or not after marriage, because in a lot of these novels women were working women with the relationship going on. So, a lot of women felt that that might be possible for them as well, that they may be able to have a job and have a marriage and be happy in that marriage and be liked by their husbands. One of the problems that these women encountered in reading romance fiction is that romance fiction is believed to be trashy. A lot of people think that it is not very good kind of literature one should be reading. Though reading for the sake of understanding English or gaining fluency in English was encouraged, these novels were looked down upon because of their focus on relationships. So, a lot of women were much constrained in where they could read and how they could read, because family members did not approve, in most cases did not approve of women reading these novels. How do women get access? I mean, lot of circulation libraries that we have in the cities particularly have, amongst all kinds of fiction, they also have this genre as well. So, that is how women are able to access it, but reading together is not a possibility here. In some cases, they felt, of course, these women are telling the researcher what they think their family is thinking. So, the researcher is not necessarily talking to the parents or family members of the girls who are reading Mills and Boon novels. The researcher is only talking to girls who are reading Mills and Boon novels and asking them about family members or what constraints they have. So, one of the constraints they mentioned was that the families were concerned that these kind of works might encourage a desire for a kind of life that may not actually be possible in real. That is, a kind of desire for romance, to be liked by the husband. It may not materialize, and then the girl will be hugely disappointed. So, that was also the girls believed that that was a concern that their families had. So, what happens then with all these constraints? If they are reading these novels, their desires and aspirations remain at the level of the individual. So, they want to work after marriage, they want to continue working after marriage, they do not see marriage as a point, a rupture in their lives as career women, or they want to go on studying or whatever. But because it is at the level of the individual, the manifestation of these desires in their lives might vary from one person to another. So, there is not any kind of collective thinking going on here. This is just at the level of the individual. They also, like one can see with many other kinds of popular culture, where women are at the core, whether it is television or cinema or fashion, confidence is appreciated, aggression is not. So, the heroines of these novels are also women who are very confident, but eventually if they cross a line, they are tamed. Because women readers also do not want them becoming too confident. That may not be good for the relationship, that is what they feel. But a more one important point that the author mentions also is these are feminine representations of male expectations of femininity. These women who are reading and possibly women who are writing them are all writing in some sense imagining and creating a male understanding of femininity, which is then getting represented in the novels. Whether that is really how men look at women or how men understand femininity to be, we do not know. Not from this study of readers of popular romance novels, because the readers happen to be women too. A lot of women also thought that men will be like how they are reading in the the same way as they appear in novels. There will be a lot of similarities between men, because this is probably how men think and how men would react. These are the assumptions also. So, this notion of romantic love that is very strongly emphasized in all these novels, was emphasized in Pride and Prejudice also, which is 200 years more earlier, have a particular context. So, in Europe and America, industrialization and capitalism, expansion of capitalism, all these caused significant changes in people's life, in their social structure, due to migration, due to new kinds of employment, lots of things changed. Now, what factors can we attribute this reading of romance novels in India? What has changed? Why are, in what context are women placing these novels? Because we know that that kind of drastic departure which occurred with industrialization in 18th century England, for instance, does not, it does not happen in such a drastic manner here. But of course, here there is a larger context in which these kind of fictional works start appearing, and that is colonial administration coming to India, the British colonial administration, widespread understanding, knowledge of the English language, schools and colleges, though very few, still they are beginning to appear in the 19th century. So, we have studies of magazines, for example, being very popular with women in 19th century Bengal. Because a new middle class is emerging, women are beginning to learn English, and then these magazines become popular. So, that is the context from which I mean the link comes from there to later on works of fiction as well. Of course, in the immediate contemporary India that we are located in, these novels have to be also placed in the larger discussions on globalization. Just like any other form of idea or thought that flows from one part of the world to another, notions of romance also do travel and do have an impact, which is why we emphasize that one should not see globalization only through the lens of trade and commerce. People's attitudes and desires also are going through huge amounts of change, with new ideas coming in and people reacting to these notions. What we know less of is men's understanding, the male understanding of romance, of masculinity and femininity, and we also have less of such works from anthropology. We have more from psychology or from literature, history, and from advertising, where they are looking at advertisements in popular magazines as a way of understanding what is going on. But we need a lot more research like this coming from an anthropological perspective in order to place it more firmly in the socio-cultural context. But even so, this work by Jyoti Puri and other authors that I will talk about now tell us about ideas of romance and relationship, the expectations women have in a globalizing turn of the century, early 21st century India. We can certainly place it in that context, a middle class, urban, English speaking, college educated women readership. That is where these works are located, as is another work by Kirsten Rudisill, which is from the southern city of Chennai, where she looks at a new series of publications called Red Publications. Page Turn Publisher is the name of the publisher, and these books aim to capture, in the words of the editor of this the publication, they aim to capture those readers who are reading Mills and Boon novels, but aim to give them a more Indian context. What that means? That means that these novels are located in India. Geographically, the setting is India, the protagonists are Indian, the issues are largely what one would come across amongst Indian families. So, that way the editor who started this, the publisher who started collecting stories for the series, firmly believed that this will be successful. So, this new publication started from 2009. So, they, on the one hand, they wanted to promote what they call Indian values. On the other hand, they also wanted to promote some understanding of rights. That a woman, for example, should not be forced into a relationship without her consent, that the woman's voice should come through. I mean, it is not like English novels about romance were not written before. Shobha De is a very well known writer who has indeed written novels on many topics including romance. However, in this series what they aim to capture is not just about the elite or what is going on in the film world or fashion world or something, but what many women will be able to relate to. What somebody is a secretary in some office, or someone is a photographer, a wedding photographer. These kind of job opportunities allow for what they call as relatability, whether women are able to relate. Another thing also, these novels were not 200 or 300 rupees, they were all below 100 rupees, so more affordable, like campus novels. And also what this Red Romance series wanted to give was more believable romance, where here also women are not rebellious but independent minded women. So they will be very firm in what they want to say, but they are not necessarily going to be trailblazers and challenge the norm. And also very strongly emphasis was laid on bringing the relationship to a closure by making the two leads find each other and end the story with marriage or them coming together. So the protagonists are not in a limbo. A story will not end with a woman deciding to end the relationship and go do something else. It will have a happy ending. But the authors claim that the romance will be more relatable than Mills and Boon kind of romance. But in the end, what the publisher said is that they aim to give voice to an Indian fantasy. Mills and Boon novels are about a fantasy about romance from the Western world. Here, the Red Romance series of novels aim to tell us what would Indian fantasy of romance look like. What would it be like if we were to do more relatable, more believable stories? So, how did they make these stories believable? For one, families played a very important role. So, unlike Mills and Boon novels, where there will be very few characters, but a lot of focus will be on the male and female lead characters, in these Desi romance, as they are called, the families of the protagonists also come into the picture, as it would be in real life. Language, the style of writing and language is also what is seen to be Indian English. That is, people people write in the way they speak. They speak English, but they speak it the way Indians speak English. It is not American English or British English that we will read in these novels. The other aspect is also in terms of characterization. So, for instance, men are not always very tall. The publisher tells Rudy Sill about how she wanted to portray men the way they look in India, the way Indian men actually look, and not everybody is tall, and therefore not every girl is going to aspire to marry or fall in love with a man because he is very tall. So, those kind of small changes were done to make this series successful. Bringing in family, showing people in their physical features more in common with how Indians think other Indians look like. The settings are more relatable, their careers are more relatable, and it is also mostly about some kind of middle class, upper middle class life. It is not necessarily about the life of the rich and famous. So that way this romance is projected, a particular kind of romance which is rightly called Desi romance by the publisher is being projected onto the readers. So, like one of the authors, one of the readers said, these novels allow for a Mills and Boon life in India itself. You do not have to necessarily read a Mills and Boon novel where the female and male protagonists are Americans located in America doing something, you know, in a ranch or some such, which a middle class urban English educated girl in India can relate to in some sense. What she relates to, if we look at Jyoti Puri's work, they relate to the idea of romance. But in this red romance novel series, what the readers are relating to are not just the idea of romance, but also the kind of situations in which romance can be possible in India. So, that is what they are focusing on. So, these are two studies that are based in India, but really the most quoted study by a scholar on romance fiction is that of Janice Radway, who wrote a book called Women Reading Romance, Reading Romance. So, that book was about these women in United States reading romance novels and sharing their ideas about what is it in these novels that appeals to them. One theme which came out most often in many of her interviews is that of escape. So, she gives several quotes in that book and articles about you know, how it allows them to escape their harsh world, it allows them to take a bit of a vacation. There is so much pressure, and therefore in one's everyday life there is a lot of pressure, and therefore these novels are an escape, escaping from everyday life. These novels predominantly seem to address that notion of wanting to escape. So, it does not, so romance itself is seems to be secondary to the first desire, which is to just escape, but then they can escape and read any kind of fiction. If fiction is what allows one to escape reality, then one can read any kind of fiction, right. So, why is romance fiction primarily consisting of female readers? Why is it assumed that women form the major bulk of readership for romance novels, and romance novels are written for women? What is now in many ways called as chick lit literature or something like that. And movies are also classified that way. Romantic comedies are always assumed to have a huge viewership amongst women, whereas it might just be that a lot of men also watch these movies, which is why I mentioned that what we really miss in popular culture studies on fiction, especially with regard to India, is our understandings of what men really engage with in their reading of popular fiction or non-fiction. Anyway, coming back to Janice Radway's work, she has these quotes about a woman, you know, who is running, dropping children in school, picking children up from school, taking them to the dentist, washing clothes, and then she feels like she's not being heard, that everyone assumes that she's not doing much work because she's staying at home. And while it is not clear, particularly from Jyoti Puri's research and Rudisil's work, whether a lot of readers, Jyoti Puri's research was amongst college going students, but it is quite possible that the books are being read by women who are not just students. And the same goes for women reading the Red Romance series as well, or the women reading Tamil romance novels written by Ramani Chandran. Who are they? Are they all homemakers, the same readers that Janice Radway talks about in her work in United States? Does the bulk of readership for romance fiction come from women who are homemakers, who feel like they have they are not being heard, they are not being seen as working, and this allows them a form of escape? Is that a possibility? So, that is one question. And also, can we see the mere act of reading these novels as a kind of resistance, even if they do not go outright and argue for it? And in what way can we situate this kind of reading with other engagements that women have with popular culture? What would be the relationship between the kind of fiction women read and the kind of movies they watch and the kind of television programs they watch? A lot of people assume, for instance, with regard to television programs in particular, that these programs are just seen by women who are housewives, homemakers. They are called housewives more commonly in India, and a lot of people assume that and tell so as well, that this is being made for them. These are aunties sitting at home and watching these works of fiction on television. And these kind of assumptions are also not very helpful in understanding the exact ways in which the readers or viewers create meaning out of this engagement they have. If fiction is creating an unreal world or a world different from what they inhabit, what is their engagement with this other world, and what is causing, what is enabling it, and what are the takeaways that happen, and how is the world of fiction responding to this readership? If from what the publisher of Red Romance told Rudisil, it is a significant departure from the kind of stories that Mills and Boon series talks about, which means that the world of fiction has to, at the end of the day, engage with its readership, change the content, change the format, and change the settings in order to be viable and in order to be read. So, one can ask all of these questions when looking at works, these three major research studies that have been done on women readers of romance fiction, to ask whether it is really an escape as much as people think it is. In what way is it an escape, if at all it is an escape, and what kind of other forms of aspirations and desires are being created, or even frustrations being given voice to by these readers and writers. So, we also need to look at the motivations from writers to engage with these kind of works of fiction. Of course, not all of popular media that is in print is about fiction. Another popular form that is consumed in print is calendars, for example, and I will briefly talk about calendar art, which has been studied in India by a scholar called Kajri Jain. So, in Kajri Jain's work, which she calls Gods in the Bazaar, she is looking at the kind of images of deities which appear in calendars and then which are in the marketplace. So, we can all recall seeing prints of these Raja Ravivarma paintings of various Hindu deities, either standalone prints which are then framed and kept for worship, or as associated with calendars, daily calendars. Therefore, the company's name will be printed on this calendar. So, you have Woodward's Gripe Water with baby Krishna, or Sunlight Soap with Vishnu on Garuda. But basically these images came about because they were part of daily calendars, which after the year is over is removed, and then these images are also framed. But what happens when images come into print? So, once images are available in print and then they are in circulation, what happens there? What kind of value are these images then acquiring as they move from one setting to another setting? First in the place where they are printed, and then to the manufacturer of these calendars or prints, and then into the homes of people. What values do they acquire in different settings? Another question which occupies these printers' minds, the people who are engaged in this, is about copyright. Who has actually the copyright for these images? What is more important, the artist who came up with this image or the image itself? What do we give more prominence for? And calendar art is also a place where technology is coming in close contact with art itself. So, what processes occur there? So, it is not that before calendar art came into existence, there were no images of religious figures circulating. We can think of Tanjore paintings or Patachitra or other forms of paintings where religious images were available. But what printing of these calendars did was to make it available in large numbers to many people. So, once it is available at that level, it is a ritual object, but it is also a commodity. So, the interface between image as a ritual object and image as a commodity is more pertinent, particularly when we look at calendar art. So, what is sacred, what is profane, and how does one understand? What do you do with an image which has the picture of a deity, but at the bottom has the name of a soap company or something? Is it a commodity? Is it for ritual consumption? Jain traces the sort of history of how this form comes into being, and particularly the beginning of factories and companies in Sivagasi in Tamil Nadu in the 1950s and 60s, where these calendars get mass produced. And there the people in the industry took care to do two things. One is about the image of the deity, which has to subscribe to what is understood to be auspicious. And the second point that they were very careful about is that no image should be repeated by the same person, by the same company at least. So, and these images are also gifts in some sense, right? Because nobody will charge a person for distributing calendars. As soon as the new year arrives, or even before, by the last week of December, people start distributing these calendars to various homes. Local shops will distribute to people in and around their regular customers. So, in one essence it is a gift, and in another essence it is also an activity done with a particular perspective of increasing clientele or keeping the clientele loyal to you. What happened when these calendar images first started appearing is Raja Ravi Varma's prints are the most famous, and usually what they consist of is the figure of the deity is more prominent in the foreground, and the background is usually very decorative, and there is a lot of use of bright colors. However, at the end of the day, people who buy these calendars are the ones who will have to look at the appropriateness of the image. So, appropriateness can range from whether the eyes have been placed in the right position, is the smile all right. People have different ways of assessing what is appropriateness, but these images are not just accepted without any critique. But these printers also feel very frustrated actually, because they cannot really change too much, because every year it will be one deity, and eventually the foreground is always the deities. At the background they can change a little bit, and slowly what they have started doing nowadays is not just rendering the Ravi Varma paintings just like that, but also depicting deities from different temples. So, that way there is a lot of variety that is going around. But what calendar art really does is in some sense mediating between advertisement and auspiciousness. It is a form of advertisement definitely for the companies that are giving them out, but also there is some kind of auspiciousness allotted, configured, placed upon the deity who forms the subject of this calendar. One problem that Raja Ravi Varma faced during his time itself is copyright. The moment his prints became available, they were reproduced and reproduced, and artists will sign, but they will still be reproduced. The same image will be reproduced with the signature of a different artist. So, the understanding of plagiarism is very different here. Why so? Because these images of deities are supposed to be available to everyone. You know, it's in the commons, it's available to all. So, no one person can hold copyright for that image. But what also we learn from looking at calendar art through the ages is how much dynamism there is. So, the kind of variety we see in the way these gods and goddesses are depicted over a period of time shows that even though it is a reproduction of a mythological or religious character, there is a huge amount of creativity which goes into the way in which they are being depicted. Another thing obviously is a lot of social groups are involved in circulation of and these calendar art. There is tremendous amount of network between communities across the country, and therefore, it provides a very rich network for us to analyze as to who are all in this business of circulating calendar art. What would make it more interesting now with digitization is now what kind of images are being reproduced. With new technologies becoming available, an artist does not have to paint them and then print them and then mass produce them. But when images are digitally brought into life, what kind of new moral economies become established? That would be a subject for a future study. But largely in our in this discussion on popular fiction and popular calendar, popular culture as in print, what we realize is the kind of issues that have been discussed in many kinds of popular culture genres exist here as well. Popular culture themes are probably the same, confirming to tradition, expressing modernity, pushing the boundaries but not exactly going all the way out, resistance, but co-opting the norm. All of these things are being expressed here and engaged with back and forth between the various stakeholders.